Support for The Nocturnist comes from the California Medical Association.
At The Nocturnist, we are careful to ensure that all stories comply with healthcare privacy laws. Details may have been changed to ensure patient confidentiality. All views expressed are those of the person speaking and not their employer.
This is The Nocturnist Conversations. I'm Emily Silverman. Today, I'm joined by Michael Grassi, showrunner and screenwriter, and Daniela Lamas, ICU physician and writer. Michael began his career writing teen dramas like Grassi and Riverdale, but found unexpected inspiration in the writing of Oliver Sacks, which led him to create Brilliant Minds, a new NBC medical drama. Daniela, who cares for critically ill patients at Brigham and Women's Hospital, has also built a parallel career in television writing, bringing authenticity and nuance to projects like Brilliant Minds. In my conversation with Michael and Daniela, we talk about how Oliver Sacks's cases inspired Brilliant Minds and shaped its distinctive focus on adaptation to disease rather than cure of disease, how the show portrays patients learning to live with conditions like colorblindness or locked-in syndrome, and the power of storytelling to reframe how we think about neurological illness. Before we dive in, take a listen to the pilot for Season 2 of Brilliant Minds, which premieres on September 22nd on NBC and streams the next day on Peacock.
The human brain. It can still leave us completely mystified. Do you see something?
Hidden cameras are all over the place.
She's experiencing Truman Show syndrome. The patient has no control over his own arm.
Hey.
Says here he's non-speaking.
Non-speaking is just a symptom of something bigger. Question is what?
I know you're not a real doctor.
You're right. I just play one on TV.
Brilliant Minds premieres September 22nd on NBC and Peacock.
I am sitting here with Michael Grassi and Daniela Lamas. Michael and Daniela, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having us. We're really excited to be here.
Thank you. Super excited to have this dynamic duo of film and TV and medicine and writing. Starting with you, Michael, maybe you could just tell us a bit about your background in show running and screenwriting and what led you up to this current medical storytelling project.
That's a good question. So I started my career telling stories in high schools. I started on a drama called Grassi, which went for many, many, many seasons. And I worked on it for about 5 years. And it's where I really cut my teeth and learned how to tell story. And then I moved to LA and I kept telling high school stories at Riverdale for 5 more seasons. And then I went to Millwood High for Pretty Little Liars Original Sin, where I kept telling high school stories. And I loved doing it so much because I felt like the experience was so universal and the stories were so much in my back pocket. And I loved telling coming of age stories and stories about firsts. And then this opportunity came along. Warner Brothers sent me 2 books, Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat and Anthropologist on Mars. And at first I didn't quite know if this was my story to tell. I didn't know if I wanted to create a medical drama. And I very quickly steeped myself in all things Oliver Sacks, not just those 2 books, but basically everything he's ever written and done. And I fell in love with him. I fell in love with his work. I fell in love with his life. I fell in love with his approach to medicine. And I saw an opportunity to have audiences sort of fall in love with this approach as well. And it became my passion project and my number one priority. And I was just as much, I was surprised by how much it became a story I needed to tell. So that's sort of my origin and how I got to Brilliant Minds without getting into too much detail.
And they sent you the book because they wanted to do something about Oliver and they thought you might be the one for it? Or why did they send you the book?
Yeah, they sent it because the question was, do you want to create a show either about Oliver Sacks or inspired by Oliver Sacks? And they wanted to adapt something for network television specifically. And this is feels like a long time ago now. It was really in the middle of COVID when this all came up. These things always take a long time. So that was the intention, was to create a television show for network inspired by these materials.
And Daniela, tell us about your medical career and your writing career and what brought you to this moment.
Sure. So I'm an ICU doctor, so medical ICU. And I, as Michael knows, I love medical TV shows in like a non-ironic, like I watch them. There was a time not that long ago that I could say I was fully up to date with Grey's Anatomy, but that time passed this past season. But just that I think gives you enough of a sense. And and why? I mean, sure, they're fun, et cetera. But I'm long been really interested in sort of how medicine is portrayed to the public, right? And stories on television, on network television, particularly, like they reach far more people than the essays that I'll write. And so at many intervals over the years, I'm not a researcher, and that's been a deep sadness for the people who oversee me at the Brigham, but and for me too over years. But at many junctures where people have told me to write grants over time, particularly in fellowship, I did a lot of freelance reporting, so I found a lot of like joy in that. But I would also find myself Googling really like medical consultant, like how do I work on a TV show? So I emailed a ton of people. I would say like none of whom responded until ultimately the head of The Resident, which was sort of the first medical TV show I worked on, replied to me on Facebook, essentially because like she had a penchant for Harvard doctors. So that like worked really well. And I was a consultant on that show and then got to be in the writer's room for a couple of years. And when that show ended, was it was a really fun experience, but like I came into it thinking like, oh, I'm going to make this more realistic. And like, what does that even really mean? And I think that like, there's some aspect of trying to, make the lingo right, but there's also this sense of like, does it feel true? And in so many, even if it's not exactly the way it would play out, but like, does it feel real? And so many medical shows, like they don't feel real because the story kind of ends when the person goes to surgery, right? It's like, oh, they wake up. And so that's why I was so excited when I learned about Brilliant Minds and had the opportunity to meet with Michael and talk about it before the first season, because this was a show where the goal was to tell stories that don't just end at diagnosis and to talk about adaptation and tell the story beyond when generally Act 6, credits. And so that definitely aligned with like my interest in the ICU and what happens after and telling these stories that we don't generally see. So it's sort of what brought me to this show specifically and medical shows broadly, which I still watch.
So how did you two find each other? Who found who and how did you come together?
Daniela, I think it was your previous showrunner who emailed me the most aggressive recommendation I've ever received from anybody in my entire life. And I had the opportunity to read Daniela, and I loved her on the page, and I loved her work in the New York Times, and then I got to meet her. And I always say my best meetings are when I read someone on the page and then I meet them in person and everything sort of clicks into place. And that definitely happened with Daniela. And she is a star in our room, and she's excellent not only at the medicine, but also at the emotional stories we tackle. And it's a delight to work with her every day.
And tell me about what attracted you to Oliver, the character, and what was your approach in developing something inspired by Oliver? As Daniela just said, there are a lot of medical TV shows out there. Everyone has a slightly different angle. And so tell me about your vision when you were putting this together.
I've always felt that a lot of medical dramas that I watched were so focused on a diagnosis and a fix and a solution. And reading about Oliver Sacks's cases, the thing that really struck me was that often there wasn't a cure, there wasn't a fix. And how do you live with a diagnosis? How do you adapt? How is a diagnosis perhaps something that helps you grow in a way you didn't expect? Or how are challenges sometimes, how do they transform your life and make you see your life differently? I feel like is something I hadn't seen explored that directly in medical dramas before. So I was really excited to explore what that could look like on network television. Like when there isn't a fix, how do you help a patient find a way forward in a satisfying way in a 42-minute episode on network television was an exciting challenge to me. Another thing I was really excited about was really simply Oliver Sacks felt like a doctor who took time with patients. It was really important for him to get to know them and to step into their shoes and try to see the world the way they see the world and try to understand the world and try to help them adapt sort of like based on who they were as opposed to what their condition is. And that was also exciting to me. Like, what would it be like for our contemporary version of Oliver Sacks to step into these patients' worlds and take conditions that are in the mind and the brain and visualize them somehow, and not necessarily a direct depiction of what their diagnosis is, but what it might feel like or what the experience might be like, and trying to show the audience and have them experience it alongside the patient. There's this tremendous empathy with Oliver Sacks that was really appealing. And it's so different from we've all spent time in hospitals, and sometimes you get minutes with a doctor or moments with a doctor. And the idea that you can have somebody who takes time and cares and listens, there was a sort of a wish fulfillment quality to the storytelling that I think was exciting to me in the room when we started breaking these stories. And also Oliver Sacks, the person, the man, he just lived this extraordinarily big, full, robust life. And something else that was really exciting to me was the opportunity to have a gay lead at the center of a network medical drama. I'm always really excited to have characters front and center that we haven't seen at the center of a show like this before. And that's one of the reasons why this became such a huge priority for me. I felt it was the kind of representation that I wish I had growing up. Like the idea of turning on ER and having the lead be a gay person was like, wow, that kind of blows my mind, you know? So that was really exciting to me as well. And Oliver Sacks spent the majority of his life hiding his sexual identity and in the closet. And this felt like an opportunity to have an out, proud gay lead at the center. And we work really closely with Kate Edgar, who runs the Oliver Sacks estate. And she said to me on one of our very first Zooms, she said she spent a lot of her life trying to find, yes, she was his ghostwriter, his editor. She helped him publish many of his books, but she also was his friend. And she always wanted to help him find a safe place in the world where he could be himself. And in a weird way, she says that Brilliant Minds feels like that safe space today. And that's just a nice way to think about it, you know, like what could have been, you know? And I feel like a lot of him hiding who he was protecting his work and his career, you know, because back then it would have had an effect on things. And I think we live in a different world now, and we've come a long way, but we're not all the way there yet. And I think Brilliant Minds is hopefully a step in that right direction.
And what about you, Daniela? What drew you to this material?
I mean, first of all, like, we won't go back and forth with compliments, but like, you know, the ability to work with somebody who felt that way about the potential of sort of network TV medical drama, like that's amazing. It's like very, very cool. The idea of giving Oliver Sacks this like second life that he won't see, but like could have been, is also extremely cool. From like the medicine standpoint, look, there's something very bold. I mean, anybody who's a neurologist listening, I think wouldn't disagree. Like neurology does not readily lend itself to network television. You know, like
very cerebral.
Very cerebral, pun maybe intended. And you know, they find a lesion, they correlate it to your physical exam, and sometimes you have steroids, and sometimes you have like a referral to like, I don't know. I obviously, like, despite working on this show, have a limited view of neurology, but no, they have a ton of cool diagnoses also, most of which you can do very little about. So that's like fascinating. How do you make a network show like that? Because that's actually most of medicine, right? We like kind of understand what's wrong, and then the kind of person who sort of like piddles along. And in the stories that we tell on television, there is this essential view that like, if a story doesn't end with the way we traditionally define success, which is you're all better, you're the same as you were, maybe even better than you ever were before, go continue on with your life, then like it's a failure. And so those of us working in hospitals, like we understand that that's not actually a metric of success. It's not a realistic metric. People are always different, but like it matters that those are the stories people see on television. It matters in a sort of subconscious way. It matters. And so the idea of having an opportunity to tell stories that have a different ending and they'll, draw the curtain closed after the person makes the tremendous save, like was very exciting to me and remains very exciting to me. And it's sort of like an interesting puzzle. Like, how do you kind of fooling people, but how do you make these stories seem cool and, network TV exciting? How do you meet the demands for like twists and turns while also being genuine to the arc of a story, keeping it in the way that I sort of define now as realistic, which is like, how do you keep it feeling true? Even if you're speeding time, obviously, because otherwise you're just like monitoring labs for 42 minutes. How do you keep it feeling true? And I think when I watched the pilot of Brilliant Minds, I felt like, hey, this hospital feels real. Like it has a vibe that's real. God, you watch some of these pilots and these are like clearly hospitals. I'm not knocking other medical shows, but like maybe not specifically that is, just in general, feels like hospitals that were created by people who saw hospitals on television. And this hospital, feels real. The characters feel real and the stories feel real. And we've had an opportunity to tell like really, really cool stories. I think in the setting of working on this show, and then also just a couple of patient encounters I had at the same time, I've become really interested in like how a lot of our goals of care conversations and things like this are influenced by, for lack of a better term, like a sort of ableism in the medical profession where, we say, just can't imagine how this person with, advanced MS could like possibly want a trach. Like we'll recommend against this thing. How could they want this thing? Oh God, they want this thing. We must not have explained correctly how bad it would be. And I think stories that have people continue beyond the event that has made them different is an important sort of counterfactual to that.
What you're saying about the show and what I saw reflected in the episodes that I watched was exactly that, was not a hunt for a diagnosis or a Sherlock Holmes mystery, but questions about what it's like to live with a different kind of brain. And it reminded me of this play that I saw in San Francisco a couple of years back. There was a playwright who was an artist in residence at the UCSF Memory and Aging Center. His name was Jake Broder. His name is Jake Broder. Hi, Jake. And Jake wrote this beautiful play about a woman named Anne who started having these bizarre symptoms. She was a scientist and had always been, at the microscope and very concrete thinker. And suddenly she was painting and painting. She was making these paintings of strawberries, like dozens and dozens of paintings of strawberries. And her husband was like, what is wrong with you? You've never painted in your life. And you're a middle-aged woman. Now suddenly you can't stop painting. She quit her job. Her personality started changing. And at first he thought maybe she was having an affair, and then maybe he thought she was having a midlife crisis. And then gradually it became clear that these were symptoms of an evolving dementia. I believe it was frontotemporal dementia. And what the play really showcased was that, yes, FTD is a horrible disease and it's tragic and it takes so much from us. But in her, ironically, it unlocked all of this artistic creativity. And she went on actually to have like a bit of a career as a painter in the last, in the twilight of her life. And then one of the paintings that she made was a visual representation of a piece of classical music that was called Bolero, which was by a composer, Maurice Ravel. She was just obsessed with this piece of music. It was a repetitive phrase of music that just repeats again and again. And so in the painting, it was like every segment of the painting was a different repetition of this musical phrase. And then in retrospect, people found out that actually that composer, Maurice Ravel, also suffered from the same type of dementia. And so in the play, they have him appearing almost like a ghost, and there's this crosstalk between him and her across time, and they both have the same brain disease that's making them kind of obsessed with like certain ways of making art in this really repetitive way. But the art was beautiful, and the piece of music is beautiful, and the painting is beautiful. And so it was just complicating this idea that disease is all bad, all, et cetera, et cetera. And that came through in the series as well. I remember there was one case that I watched about somebody who had a brain tumor and they were going to remove the tumor, but it was going to alter the way that he stored memories. But then there was some things about like, okay, well, if that's going to be your new way of living in the world, like what are some ways we can think about being more present or, things like that. So anyway, that's a very long story, but I just wanted to know if there were any particular patient stories or cases in the series that were your favorite or that stood out or that exemplified that idea of, it's not about solving a mystery, it's about adapting.
Well, Emily, I love that anecdote, and I love hearing about that and how it made you think of the show, because we often think about Brilliant Minds as, yes, we're a medical drama, yes, we are in part a medical procedural, but we really do think of ourselves as sort of an emotional procedural first and foremost, and we try to think about like what are stories about the human condition, and when we're talking about the medical, we're really talking about what does this mean to our patient? And like Daniela said earlier, what is true, So hearing that's really, really interesting. And I love so many of our cases from season 1 and upcoming cases in season 2. But one of the cases I love from season 1 is a really simple one, and it's inspired by a real Oliver Sacks case of the colorblind painter. Mm-hmm. And if you are an artist who's used to seeing the world and depicting the world a certain way, what happens if you lose that ability to sort of communicate and express your emotion through color? How do you adapt when the world suddenly doesn't look like the way it used to look before? And what does that mean to our patient? Was a case that I found very moving and a very good example of adaptation and how a loss can maybe be a gain in some ways, and how do you help a patient adapt and reframe a diagnosis? So that's one of the ones I think about. Daniela, what's one of yours? I'm curious.
Sure. Well, first of all, that's an amazing anecdote. And I've been obsessed with that, not knowing the play, which now I have to find out about. I've been obsessed with that fact about frontotemporal dementia. What's pathology and what is the real person versus disease? And if the painting is seen as pathology, we see it as something different. And that's just very interesting to me. What I was really there are many cases I was really excited about. I'll use as an example to show sort of how this show is different. The longer term story about a patient with locked-in syndrome was amazing to me to be able to tell a story about somebody locked in. Again, doesn't necessarily lend itself to network television, but what I think we were able to do in that story is I think when you're telling stories about people adapting and saying, well, there's this great sort of way you can exist in the world, even though it's different, there's a risk to sort of going too far, being it's okay. Everybody can adapt to any sort of horrible circumstance. And if you can't, well, clearly you just haven't had a doctor who's as much of a cheerleader as Wolf. And so, in this case, I think we really pushed against that and said that people can also choose not to. That there is also a legitimate choice to say, I see the way life can be. I am going to choose not to adapt to that. And that as doctors, and this is really hard for us, I imagine for you as well, the realization that I have over time again and again, that my job is not actually to make the person conform to what I think they should do, but actually to make sure that they understand to the extent to which these things are imaginable, which they're really not, the extent to which they can understand what is possible in the future, and then support them in making the decision that's the best for them, even if it's not the decision I'd make for myself or for the people I love. And I think pushing our characters to do that and ultimately making a decision that wasn't in my mind the way a TV decision would usually go. We would say, oh, you're locked in and you found the love of your life. You can go be locked in and love each other together and maybe find a cure. That I thought was a pretty sort of powerful example of what was possible in the show.
It is such a fine line, isn't it? Adapting versus romanticizing.
Yes. And that's a risk, right? Whichever way you go, it's a risk. And for people seeing both sides in these, people working in hospitals, but I think we generally go too much on the other side. So I think it's more than okay to swing somewhat, but then to also offer stories to say there's still choice.
And in that choice, how do you find the hope? And how is giving a patient agency in their care a hopeful story? And I think that that's what was interesting about that arc in episode 107 was balancing that, because at the end of the day, you do want to leave audiences feeling hope. That is a big part of what Oliver Sacks did, and that's sort of our North Star every step of the way.
I want to ask about writing for and working with Zachary Quinto. I first came across him in the Star Trek movie, and I kind of fell in love with him. He's just so charismatic and so complex and so perfect for this role. Very handsome, of course, also. And yeah, I was just wondering about the casting process and what it's like to write for him and to work with him. He's incredibly talented.
So Zach is the best. Just to go back and give you the origin story, I wrote the pilot for this and we got a green light, but it was cast contingent, which is like terrifying. There's never like sort of an easy, like you're never popping the champagne in this business. It's like, okay, well, we finally got the green light, but it's cast contingent. Okay, well, don't even ice the champagne yet. But Zachary was our first and only choice for this, and he was the first person that we sent the script to, and we hopped on a Zoom with him, and from that very first meeting began one of the greatest collaborations, or if not the greatest collaboration of my career thus far. What's interesting, when you attach an actor like Zachary Quinto to a project like this, he's not necessarily auditioning, and I hadn't heard him read for it yet. And I'll never forget this, but we were sitting in the very first table read of the pilot, and from the very first lines, I remember like my body completely relaxing and being like, we are in the absolute best hands. Like Dr. Oliver Wolf is in the absolute best hands. And I think what's been interesting about the process is when you have an actor like Zachary take on a role like this, he inspires us. He inspires all of us in the room. So we get to write to Zachary, and he brings so much wit to this and so much curiosity and joy, and we love writing for him and to him, and his chemistry with the ensemble is so special, and we love all of those relationships, with this particular with Carol, who's played by Tamberla Perry. So we love Zachary, and it's an honor to get to work with him, truly. And it's fun, and he's very passionate, and wouldn't have it any other way. We're very lucky to have him as our number one.
I think the only thing I'll add is that like explaining medicine to actors who care about it is really cool. Like it's so cool. It's so cool to sort of, if there's like a question from set, like, oh, he's wondering like at this moment, like, why would I say this here? I'm like, oh, you'd say this because of this. I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah, he really cares about being genuine to his character and making sure that his medical decisions track from episode to episode, which I think is fantastic. I mean, it makes sense, right? But it's fascinating the extent to which the actors will develop a sense of like what they would do medically. I've kind of play in my mind with the idea of bringing the writer's room to rounds and seeing, I suspect they could run rounds just as well as I do. It's the medical ICU. Like we monitor PM labs, but like thinking about these actors on rounds as well. And like, I think that they would bring their same like self to it and make like medical decisions that are like in keeping with their characters. Like, it's just very cool to think about.
Do you get Daniela to go to the set and interact with the actors as a writer?
Yeah. So the way Michael does it is that writers are always on set to kind of uphold the sort of integrity of the script as it's been generated in the room, and just to be present to answer questions. And so my schedule's been like confused, like a little ICU, and then I have a baby, but yeah. But yeah, I was on set last season and will be this season. And it's like so cool. I mean, it looks like it's like a hospital. It's like, it's just, a hospital set is like an extremely, extremely cool thing if you're used to being in a hospital. People wear scrubs. It's really funny. It's like total kick out of it.
So you have season one. Season one is out. And now it sounds like you're in the process of finishing up writing season two, or where are you in season two?
Good question, Emily. So We're a network drama, which means we are writing, prepping, shooting, editing all at once. So multiple balls in the air, which requires an incredible team, which Daniela is here right now, and there are many more people who are a part of it. And we are currently breaking episode 209 in the room. We're shooting our Halloween episode, our very first Halloween episode, 206, and editing 4. And so all of the balls are in the air.
And when you're in the writer's room coming up with story arcs for an episode or for a season, are you exclusively drawing from Sax's writing? Like everything is loosely based on a real case, a real patient, or is it a mix? Like, do you make up some of the stories, or how does that work?
A mix. So from the beginning, we were always like, we have this incredible trove of real life cases that Oliver Sacks wrote about. We also have his real life, but we always sort of take them and bring them into 2025 and also are inspired by other real life cases that we bring to the room that we're excited about.
And this season, we have another doctor who's in the room, full-time as an emergency medicine doctor, Ryan, who's awesome. And so he's also bringing his own sort of stories to the room. So there's like a lot of different like ways that medical stories get in there.
Daniela, what is it like for you to toggle between a fake hospital and a real hospital, and between the heightened drama of writing for the show and a very different type of heightened drama of being in the ICU? And do you ever get whiplash going from one to the other, or do you feel like they transition back and forth pretty seamlessly and they feed each other? Or what is it like to be living? It's almost like a double life.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've for various reasons been really attracted to the idea of living double lives, and so I wanted to say thank you to that, but I was like, that's not necessarily a compliment. But no, I think, look, there's something inherently weird about like finishing rounds and being like, okay, like I'm going to go join Zoom to see if there's like a fictional patient I can manage, and the unit's in fine hands with, but like, it's like a little weird. But it's also fine. People go to their research labs. Like now I'm just justifying the way I use my time. But I think mostly it is a very positive thing. Thinking about certain cases I had last season, I say, like I had a season in the ICU. Certain ICU cases I had during the last season of the show, would like very directly impact the kinds of things that I would pitch, or like the language I would choose to use around something. I think that these things really do sort of influence each other in a positive way. And then it's really easy to see the way in which being in a hospital frequently like lends itself to pitches in the room, right? But I think it actually impacts itself positively in the other direction too. Like I do think, as you understand very well, right, that like thinking about story and thinking about the way we build narrative around illness, like that also makes you better in the hospital setting. So I think that it goes both ways. Now, as I said, there's another doctor in the room, but there were more occasions last season where occasionally I would get a text with an actually urgent question about a fictional patient while I was on rounds. And that's just like, that's like funny. That's like a funny moment, it's fine. It's fine to step off Francie, but it's funny. Yeah.
And what about reception of the show? Have you, I don't know, any colleagues or friends or people in your family or random audience members? What has the response been?
I mean, from the hospital setting, people are into the show. The medical ICU nurses like have to watch whatever I'm part of, because like it'll be awkward otherwise. And because I know they watch Grey's Anatomy, so like, come on, guys. But
is Grey's still on?
Yes, it's still on. I mean, you're pretending ignorance. Come on. No, I'm kidding.
No, I didn't. I really didn't know. I remember watching it in my freshman dorm room.
Yeah, it's still going. I think people are still watching it in their freshman dorm rooms. But no, I think that when the nurses, I feel like they're a much better gauge, right? So when the nurses like something, it feels like, oh, this must have felt real. So that's a good reception. Obviously, my parents.
Daniela, that's such a good point that nurses are a good gauge. So we have an incredible nurse, Megan, who's on set full time and prepping all of the episodes. And she is such a good barometer for us. So when she's on set and we're blocking a scene, like if she's crying during the blocking, we know we're in a good place. Like that's like always a helpful gauge. But reception's been great. It's been from the beginning, it was exciting to put out a show where we sort of were able to find opportunities for diversity in multiple ways. And what was exciting was for people to be able to come to the show and maybe find themselves in it, whether through a patient experience or maybe something their family went through, or potentially through one of our doctors and what they're experiencing. So the best feedback that we got were when people were able to see themselves or able to see themselves represented in a way that they hadn't seen before, I felt like was some of the most exciting feedback. And one of the things I often was that we were a comforting, hopeful place to go to every week. So that was one of the things by design, I really wanted to create a medical drama that delivered on all of the comforts that we've grown to love about medical dramas, but trying to deliver it through a brand new lens that we hadn't really seen before. And I think, this is our lens, and I think we always come back to this in the room when we're breaking any story, but we really think about mental health, and we really think about Oliver Sacks, who dedicated his life to destigmatizing mental health, taking conditions of the mind that were perhaps scary or never talked about and making them accessible and telling a story. And I think following that North Star has been a really satisfying path in terms of setting us apart from other medical dramas. And the best feedback we get is that there's hope and comfort in that, if that makes sense.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, both of you, for coming on the show to talk about your show. And maybe you can let the audience know, where can they find you? Where can they find your work? Also your work, Daniela, your writing and all of that. And where can they find the show?
No, you tell when the show is. I'm bad at knowing about when things are.
Season 2 premieres September 22nd on NBC at 10 p.m. after The Voice, and we drop the next day on Peacock. And you can catch up on season 1 right now on Peacock. It's all available.
And Daniela, where can we find your work? You have a book, you have essays, you have a lot. So where can we find you?
I mean, the essays that I write most are in the New York Times, theoretically once a month, but in reality, sometimes once a month. So in the Times opinion section.
Awesome. Well, Michael and Daniela, thank you again for coming on the show to talk about brilliant minds. So much fun to chat.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
It was great.
This episode of The Nocturnist was produced by me and producer and head of story development, Molly Rose Williams. Our executive producer is Allie Block, and Ashley Pettit is our program director. Original theme music was composed by Yosef Monroe, and additional music comes from Blue Dot Sessions. The Nocturnist is made possible by the California Medical Association, a physician-led organization that works to ensure the doctor-patient relationship remains at the center of medicine. To learn more about the CMA, visit cmadocs.org. This episode of the Nocturnist Conversations is sponsored by the Physicians Foundation, which supports physician well-being, practice sustainability, and leadership in delivering high-quality, cost-efficient care. The Nocturnist is also made possible by donations from listeners like you. In fact, we recently moved over to Substack, which makes it easier than ever to support our work directly. By joining us with a donation of $2, $5, or $10 a month, you'll become an essential part of our creative community. I'm your host, Emily Silverman. See you next week.